Hello, and welcome to this episode of Tru North. My name is Pádraig, and today we have a wonderful conversation, open, honest, true, and deep, with Pat Divilly. Through his work, Pat is dedicated and committed to the emotional and mental well-being of those who he works with. And a lot of the time that is men's work, but the principles and fundamentals of his work can be applied to almost any aspect of life. Pat takes a wide perspective on the components of overall wellness, whether that be through meditation, breath work, neuro-linguistic programming, CBT, and so much more. What I find truly inspirational about Pat is that he has so many accolades and certifications to his name, and yet he still continues to learn and grow and develop, not just for the work that he does, but for himself as well. This episode is a chat between two humans, two souls connecting for what essentially is the first time. And I am really, really grateful to Pat for having come on the podcast today and sharing his story for me and for everybody watching. I'm really, really excited to be able to share this episode with you, and I really hope that you gain a lot of value and a lot of insight from what we have to share today. So let's dive deep into the conversation. Pat, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to start today's episodes with a slightly different question. I usually go down a different route, but I want to sort of just gauge human to human level, soul to soul. How are you? How are things?
I'm well. Slight bit of overwhelm, I think, this week with it's been a busy couple of weeks with travel and talks and seminars and workshops, which I love. I love all of those things, but a little bit of overwhelm as I come toward the end of that. It's just been a lot of travel and a lot of people, a lot of energy. But yeah, apart from that, I'm well. Someone asked me last week, they messaged me and they said, "How's your heart?" And it was an amazing way to ask the question of "How are you?" Similar to how you asked just now, because obviously the tendency sometimes will be to say, "Oh, it's good," or "It's fine," or it's to kind of bypass what's actually there. So "How's your heart?" made me kind of check in and say, my heart's kind of a little bit sad, a little bit tired, also excited. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, brilliant.
And how are you?
I'm good, yeah. In all honesty, feeling slightly under pressure for myself and putting myself under pressure, but yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying what I'm doing at the minute. I'm enjoying this, and I'm enjoying our conversation, and our conversation we had in the car as well on the way here. But I'm doing the best I can. I think that's the main thing, you know. And I think that's all we can do, really. You know, try our best. You know, try not to put too much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, it's amazing. There was a kid on to me on Instagram the other day. He's like 17, 18. And he's just looking for advice that he's overwhelmed. He's got his leaving cert and he's got sport and he's got all these commitments. And one of the pieces I offered him, just from my own perspective, was sometimes there's like seasons in life and even seasons within the year. So I've been in the season of just chaos for a few weeks. And it's okay to do that sometimes. I feel there's been a lot of growth in the last couple of weeks alone from this kind of traveling and facilitating and just my own personal life and stuff like that. And then I'll go into a bit of contraction and a different season to kind of integrate and digest and slow down. So as you say, doing your best with the season you're in, I think, is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched a little bit just upon growth there and contraction, because I feel like sometimes when we look at, you know, development, it always has to be growth and growth and growth, you know, and if there's any type of retraction or contraction or decompression of expansion, then we sort of freak out at times as well. For those that don't know you or don't understand your work, I just want to touch upon your mission, which is to create an authentic and connected world by allowing the space for yourself and others to live with compassion, curiosity, and playfulness, which I love especially the last two, the curiosity and the playfulness bit. In your own words, if you can, what is it that you do?
I create a connected and authentic world. That's what I try to do. I try to create a connected and authentic world by allowing space for myself and others to live with compassion, curiosity, and playfulness. And I'll go into the specifics of that, but I guess the context of that mission statement is that a mission statement is kind of like a new Tru North, a compass, something that can keep you directed. And I also work with a shadow mission, so that's the opposite. Right. So I create a disconnected and inauthentic world by living in busyness, distraction, and noise.
Right.
So sometimes we're like big on positive thinking and where we're going. But I think if you hold your shadow in front of you, it can be really useful, because there's lots of times where I'm in distraction and chaos and noise and judgment and all those other things. But the purpose of the mission statement is to think about what type of world do I want to create? And oftentimes that's informed by what was lacking in our youth. So in my youth, I felt I didn't have a sense of connection with others, and I felt I couldn't be myself. So that informs some voids that were there that, you know, support now where my values lie. So I value connection and authenticity, and then it's a case of how do I do it? Like, how do I create a value and connection and authenticity? And that's when play comes in, curiosity comes in, compassion comes in, and space, allowing space. But more directly to your question, I work with mental, emotional, and relational wellness, I would say, at the moment. Right. I do that in different forms. So I have a podcast, which I haven't recorded in months. I do a lot of workshops in the corporate space. I do workshops in the public world, run men's groups, meditation groups, breathwork groups. I do a lot of different things, but all with the purpose of bringing people together, trying to create safe space. I shared with groups recently that in sessions, in ceremonies, in ritual, oftentimes the facilitator will say, this is a safe space. And I was saying that for a long time. But someone recently said to me, it's kind of presumptuous to say this is a safe space, because we have no context as to how safe people actually feel. Yes. For me to run a men's group and have 100 guys in the room and to say this is a safe space, there's going to be a lot of guys in the room intimidated by that space. But I endeavor to make it a comfortable and supportive environment, I would say. So yeah, I focus on mental, emotional, and relational wellness, and do it in a group setting, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's so, and you just said it there, you know, making it a comfortable space, you know, is probably the main priority there, you know, and I'm sort of the same sometimes when I'm doing group work or even one-to-one work, you know, and it's something I do say, you know, you're safe in this space, and you never really think, what is their definition of safe? You know, what is, or out of the 100 people in this room, you know, is everybody's definition the same? You know, so it's something that I've never really thought about now until you just said it, you know, which is good.
And I'm the same. It was only a couple of months ago that was kind of shared with me, and I said, oh, but that's the beauty, I think, of being open and having peers, I suppose, that can challenge a perspective. And it's not to say, oh, that's the right perspective, but it's just a perspective. And yeah, I've found it useful generally when I share that at the start of a session, because I say that now a lot at the start of the session, that I'm not going to call this a safe space. I'll always see a few heads nodding, which kind of tells me that, oh yeah, it
Fair
lands.
Yeah, they're acknowledging and resonating with it, which is good. It's interesting you just touched upon mental and emotional well-being there, in a sense. What was the moment of change for you? Because I know in the past you had some time to focus on physical fitness. What was that moment when you realized maybe I should work towards mental and emotional well-being?
Yeah, I suppose the quick background was that I struggled with confidence growing up, and I struggled with self-esteem, and always had a kind of belief that I didn't fit in, that I wasn't enough. And in my teens, I found martial arts and I found weight training, and it was the first thing in my life that gave me confidence. So from 15, I decided I'm going to be a fitness guy, like that this is going to be my profession, this is going to be what I do in life. But at the time in Ireland, there wasn't much of an industry for fitness. So it was kind of a lofty ambition to think I could make a business from it. But ultimately, 10 years on, I did make a business from fitness. I failed with my first business in Dublin. Right. And it's the old cliche, you know, looking back, it wasn't a failure. Yeah. But at the time, it really shook me to my core, you know, that I had a lot of young ego in the sense of I'm going to be somebody, I'm going to achieve, I'm going to show everybody. And now I look back, I realize nobody cared, you know, either way, which is, you know, I'm studying with a teacher at the moment, and she talks a lot about how a lot of our drama and our struggles are from making impersonal things personal. So, you know, a breakup is impersonal. Everyone experiences breakups, but when we really make it personal and we think we're the center of the universe, it can be a struggle. So I think in my younger years, I thought I was the center of the universe, and probably still do at times. when I get stressed. But after failing with the first business, I went back to Galway. I started again. I set up a fitness business, and a lot of my generation had gone to Canada and Australia and different places, which prompted me to take my physical fitness business online. And I think I was the first Irish guy doing that at scale. So between 2012 2016, I had 20,000 clients go through online training courses.
Right.
And in terms of the transition then to mental and emotional wellness, it was two things. One was professionally, you get 20,000 people all getting the same support, same resources, same plans, and very, very varying results. You start to say, oh, maybe it's not the training and nutrition, maybe it's something else. Yeah. And so that made me curious about sleep and stress and meditation and self-talk. But the bigger piece was I ticked every box I wanted to tick on my quest for happiness. So I bought a house and a car, great girlfriend, great friends, the business I'd always wanted. And I was more overwhelmed at 28 than I'd ever been, and anxious and depressed and all these, couldn't sleep. Felt like life was an uphill battle. And I kind of ran out of places to look. Like it was like, all right, this will make me happy. This will make me happy. This will make me happy. And when you run out of places to look, I suppose you have to you can turn the lens back toward yourself. And that led me on a quest of studying meditation and breath work and plant medicines and all the other bits and pieces. And in a way, I think I've lived out loud that I built this audience through fitness. Back in the day, I'd done the Late Late Show and TV shows and all this kind of stuff. So I had an audience, and I just walked away from fitness pretty much overnight. But I shared a lot of what I was learning from a mental health standpoint. And now, 2023, 7-8 years on. Hopefully I'm starting to establish myself as a guy that has a sense of mental and emotional wellness. And I try to put it across in a way now that with physical health, we recognize the need for physical practices over time. Like I'm not going to wake up 20 years now and hope that physical health is just going to be something I have. Yeah. What I do in the next 20 years will have an impact. And that doesn't mean I won't get sick at times, but it means I'm giving myself a chance. And with mental and emotional wellness and relational wellness, I think I always just hoped or assumed I should feel good. I should feel happy. I should feel content. But now I'm more proactive. So like, what can I do for myself consistently?
You said there about almost walking away from the fitness industry overnight. How was that for, I suppose, for two aspects? Because we always talk about the self, the true self, and the ego. So how was that stepping away from that industry, or leaving the business in a sense?
It was terrifying. I don't know, it's terrifying, the word. Recently, I've been talking a lot about the hero's journey. The hero's journey, for those that aren't familiar, is the typical story arc that we see in movies and films and books, where the hero goes on a quest or an adventure and they take on dragons and they slay dragons and meet their enemies and meet their mentors, and eventually usually they go into a cave and they meet the ultimate dragon. Yeah. And after going on this quest, they return back to their ordinary worlds, but they're a different person. And that hero's journey actually represents our experience of going into our unconscious. So within our unconscious, we've got our fears, we've got our grief, we've got our anger, we've got lots of different hidden parts of ourselves. And so the quest of the hero's journey is when life kind of knocks on your door, which usually can be, it can be an internal or external experience. Like if I'm in a 20-year relationship and my partner wakes up in the morning and says, I'm leaving this now, that's going to send you on a hero's journey. But the other option with the hero's journey is there's a call within. So we're in a job that we are not content with, and we have this inkling inside that something needs to change. We can deny that. So that's called the refusal of the adventure, when the call to adventure comes. Yeah. But you can only deny that so long before you get sick or you get burnt out or whatever it might be. So that at that time was my hero's journey. My ordinary world was, the ordinary world is where you start. It's the conscious world where you're aware of who you are, where you fit in, who your friends are, who your allies are. And then going into the unknown is going into the darkness, going into the shadow, going into the unconscious. So for me, it involves stepping away from an identity I built, stepping away from validation, stepping away from approval, stepping away from money, stepping away from safety, stepping into the unknown completely. And it was an interest. I was only telling someone the other day that my parents are very supportive, but early on they said to me, you can't do the fitness thing. You're not going to make money in Ireland being a fitness guy. And they really encouraged me to go and study physiotherapy so I could get a quote unquote real job. And then when I built this big business and I was making lots of money, and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. They said, you can't be a mindset guy. You can't be a, whatever. I didn't even know what the word was. But that's the hero's journey, is trusting yourself and going on the adventure and stepping into the unknown. And we're always in that, I think, Yeah.
To get a bit of an understanding of the Pat that sits here in front of us today, I want to just flip the coin a little bit. So what do I need to know about your earlier years, your formative years, to understand you as you are now?
And the big piece, I guess, is like early on I was bullied quite a bit. And early on we moved around quite a bit. So I lived in different houses, went to a few different schools. And those experiences of being bullied and moving around and being the new guy kind of formed a couple of narratives for me that I've lived in most of my life. So there's been a story of I'm always the new guy. There's a story of not fitting in, not being enough. There's lots of those stories that have played out. And one of the exercises I often share with my clients is to take your life and divide it by, we'll say 6, or take the number of years in your life and divide by 6. So if you're 36, divide by 6. You've got 6-year increments. And with each of the 6-year increments, break your life down. So 0 to 6, 7 to 12, and so on and so forth, right up to the current age. And imagine taking an external view and just stepping out for a few moments and writing the plot for each chapter of your life so far. And note the key characters, the villains, the heroes in each chapter, and give a chapter title. And when I first did this exercise, or a variation of it, that's what I recognized was the first chapter was about being bullied. And in subsequent chapters, there was lots of success, there was lots of achievements, but the narrative or the lens through which I saw it was still from that standpoint of the wounded child. Right. So my successful years were not... I think I called that chapter like winning alone or something like that. Okay. Now, just 2 benefits to, I suppose, exploring your past is, one, you can possibly change the narrative or the perspective, or the second is you can wake up and you can say, oh, there's a different way to be. So back to your question, I was good to teaching or ideas, but those were the early experiences that informed, I suppose, how I saw the world, how I saw myself. And still, I'm big on inner child work. So I recognize that when I get scared or overwhelmed as a 35-year-old man, oftentimes that old stuff comes up. Or when I get tired, or when I get stressed, or as I said at the start of the interview, when I'm overwhelmed from taking on too much, those narratives can sometimes come in for me. Yeah. So I recognize that. Don't believe your thoughts when you're stressed or you're tired.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it's the things that take place in our formative years, especially, as children, that we assign an emotion to a situation, and then later on in life, when a similar situation happens, we revert back to that initial emotion that we felt to that initial situation, and then over time we just build and build and build all of those circumstances and eventualities and those situations together into this one big blob, that ends up becoming our belief system and our attitudes, and forms part of our subconscious mind, I suppose. You touched upon men's work earlier on as well, and I know you were recently doing your base camps up here. You were here last week for the base camp at Belfast. What is it about men's work in particular that attracted you to that realm?
Partially fear and another hero's journey. I was always intimidated by men and by groups of lads. Part of the bullying, I think, early on was team sports and, not feeling like I was one of the lads or whatever it might be. So again, that informed me. And something I recognized in a plant medicine ceremony a few years ago was that a lot of my life was driven by a competitiveness because I felt like I'm not enough. So I would compete, particularly with other men. It might not have always looked like that from the outside looking in, but like wiser, older mentors would see that in me. Yeah. They'd be like, relax, you don't need to be pushing so hard. You don't need to be... I didn't trust people. I didn't want other people to win, probably on some level. I just wanted to, get ahead. And I think the men's work, getting into it myself a couple of years ago, when I first heard of it, like a couple of years ago, I thought, what are you going to do? Like sit around in a circle and talk about your feelings? not in a harsh way, but I just didn't get what's the difference. But there's something unique that happens when men sit in a circle and share. And part of it is the shared humanity of sharing your struggles. I'm a big believer that your secrets make you sick. So the things that we hold so close and we guard so close, the bits we're ashamed of, it's like you said there, you know, when we have difficult childhood experiences and we look to hide those parts for the rest of our lives, there's a huge amount of energy being used to hide who we are. And so having a space where you can go and you can kind of reveal a part of yourself and not be re-shamed or re-traumatized, I think is very healing. You know, in the last couple of years, I've gotten to know a lot of people that have come from recovery circles or AA groups, or for whatever reason, you know, I haven't been in 12-step recovery groups, but I just, these people have, and I think part of the reason I'm attracted to these people and really appreciate their friendship, like the people that I've met over the last couple of years, is the way they communicate, like their capacity to express how they feel, they express what they need, to share what's going on for them. And that will have been largely taught through 12-step recovery groups, where you sit in a circle a couple of times a week and you share what's going on for you. So I see men's work in a similar fashion, like you're learning to reveal a bit more of yourself. And yeah, that's what led me to it. I think the power that I saw in my own life from doing the work, and then feeling like needing a new challenge myself, I would say, and seeing myself as, I often create the things that I need. So like when I set up a fitness business years ago, it was all based on community because I needed community. Right. Now I'm at a point in my life where I need men around me that are, you know, people that I feel safe with and feel supported by and feel all those things.
Yeah, so it's very much reciprocal in a way, you know, like your work informs your personal journey and vice versa, your personal journey informs your work.
Yeah, for good or for bad. You know, as a businessman, it doesn't make a lot of sense, you know, like to walk away from a business because I'm not into it anymore, but that's just how I am. Once I'm done with something, I'm done with something, and I'll step aside. And I'm not precious. Like when I was in fitness, I'd have a couple of hundred clients, and once they got to a certain point, it'd say, go to CrossFit now, or go here, or go there. So same with this stuff I'm doing now. I don't need to hold people. I want them to outgrow me and go to someone else. But I'd like to be the gateway drug for people to meditation or to breath work or whatever it might be. That's how I see myself to a certain degree.
Yeah, to step into that world, I suppose.
Yeah.
What do you find then are sort of, if you can categorize them, sort of the more common issues that men face? I
think probably expressing feelings and needs is a big one. So like, I struggle with expressing how we feel. I often share this story about going to stay with a friend of mine in New York, a girl called Hallie, and I met her for 10 minutes in Texas, and she said, oh, if you're ever in New York, we were at a festival with Aubrey Marcus a couple of years ago, and as I say, met her briefly, and she said, if you're ever in New York, you can come stay with me. So a year later, I went to stay with her. And every day she'd ask, Pat, how do you feel? And I'd say, I feel good. And she'd say, good's not a feeling. And I'd be like, okay. And next day she'd go, how do you feel? I'd say, I feel fine. She'd say, fine's not a feeling. I'm like, fuck. Next day, how do you feel? I feel grand. She'd like, what's wrong with you? And I thought she was crazy. And then a couple of days later, I turned to her. I said, how do you feel? And I was kind of half joking, being sarcastic. But she stopped and she'd closed her eyes and she'd started breathing into her body and just said, I feel this and I feel this and I feel this. And I thought, wow, like that's a superpower. Because coming home from New York that time, I thought, well, if I don't know how I feel and I can never name how I feel, I can't possibly know what I need. It's like when a baby cries, you don't say the baby shouldn't be crying. You say, oh, the baby needs something here. And same for us when we've got difficult emotions, difficult feelings that we're experiencing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a feedback loop. So I think expressing our feelings is a big one. Expressing our desires and our needs is probably another one. Like this common thing of the nice guy. I definitely play that one out. You know, where do you want to go for lunch? Oh, I don't mind, I'm easy.
Oh, I'm the same.
But then having resentment, right? And like being pissed off because you're feeling like
I don't want to go here actually. Now that I think about it, you know. I
tell this story. Like I was talking about, you know, I asked the girl on a date, I don't know when it was, a couple of months ago. And I said, do you fancy going for Indian food? This is only an Indian food where I was living. And she's like, nah, I don't like Indian food. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that was a bit blunt. And it wasn't at all blunt. I'm just so passive. I'll be like, yeah, I'll do whatever. So, yeah, expressing our feelings. I think expressing our needs and our desires. So a lot of it's around communication and using our words, for lack of a better. That's something that probably wasn't modeled for us, a lot of the time. Like, how do we communicate in conflict? How do we communicate even our love? That's a big piece. I think another piece is trying to juggle it all, feeling like we're not supported, feeling a big challenge is the lone wolf. So like trying to do it all by ourselves. That's another one that comes up a lot. Afraid to ask for support, afraid to seem weak. There's many challenges.
Yeah, I think we sort of touched, we were talking in the car on the way here just about a few different things, and I think the concept of the lone wolf sort of applies slightly to my life, in a sense of trying to be very independent and trying to have control of everything, and yet at the same time I should really be asking other people for maybe a hand here or a hand there. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are the same in their lives, but you touched upon something there, and I think it alluded to sort of this vulnerability as well that we struggle with as men. Why do you think that is, that we struggle to show vulnerability?
Just to quickly close a loop on the lone wolf, I work with a group in the States called K4. They're great. I've been a member of their group for a while, and they're big on the idea of the lone wolf and the problem with the lone wolf. But something I've learned from them is that like this idea of the lone wolf is somewhat glamorized, but the reality of the lone wolf is when the lone wolf is on the mountaintop howling, they're howling because they're hungry, and they die not long after that. So if you ever see wolves hunting, they hunt in packs, and that's how they take down the big game or the big bison, So similar for ourselves, we want to do big things in the world. We can't do it all on our own, and that's definitely a piece I need to work on.
Yeah. But
to the piece on vulnerability and why we struggle, I think the key bit is we've been conditioned to learn that it's not okay to feel. I often find that how our emotions were dealt with as children is often how we deal with our own emotions as adults. So if I was a child and I said, I'm anxious, and my parents said, I didn't have time to be anxious when I was your age, maybe when we're older and we feel anxious, the voice in our head says, I don't have time to be anxious. Or if I'm fearful as a child and they say that I'm fearful, and the parent says, don't be silly. Maybe when I experience fear as an adult, I say, don't be silly. So I think that's part of it, is we model what we saw growing up. I think another one is obviously as boys, we're told boys don't cry. We're told, so there's implicit and explicit messaging as children. Explicit is you're explicitly told something. Implicit, it's implied. So I would say, for me at least, it was implied that if you show too much joy or happiness, you're going to be made fun of. If you cry, you're going to be made fun of. And so I would often say that the only emotion that was safe to show as a young man was anger. Because if I show you my anger, you're not going to mess with me. Yeah. But if I show you anything else, I'm at risk of being bullied or whatever it might be. Like Gabor Mate, who I've studied with for a year, talks a lot about the battle between authenticity and acceptance or attachment. So we come into the world, and I believe each of us have a soul contract. So we've got certain things to fulfill, certain people to meet, certain people to help. And so we have an authentic expression longing to come out through us, but then we also want to be accepted. And so there's this battle. Will I be myself, or will I sacrifice myself? And most of us will sacrifice ourselves because it's terrifying to be on our own, particularly as kids. So that's where the struggles with vulnerability come from, I think. Because then as you get older, for men, we're kind of thought to be the provider, to achieve, to do, to be in that masculine energy. And maybe there's no space in our lives, or that could be actual time in our lives, or it could be physical space in our lives where we can go and have a cry or have a scream or whatever it might be.
Yeah. You did mention there about your training with Gabor Mate as well. And I know you were training compassionate inquiry.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what that's all about. I know one or two people up this direction who have done it. What was your experience with that?
It was good. It was like a lot of my experiences in recent years. I was the only man on the course for a year. It was an intensive year-long professional training, people from all different backgrounds. It was broken down that we'd have a lot of modules that we'd go through throughout the year. Then you'd have weekly therapy sessions. So you'd offer therapy to someone with an observer who would give feedback, and then you'd cycle it out. So you're getting a lot of repetitions in terms of therapy. Then you'd get your own personal therapy with a therapist outside of that. So it was a pretty intensive year. Like they told us at the start of the year, this is going to be triggering. And I thought, I've done lots of things. This will be fine. But it definitely wore on me at times. You'd be having a great day and then you have to show up on the call. They say, what's going wrong today? I'm like, nothing, it's fine. They're like, we need some material to work with. But the crux of Gabor's work is kind of what we talked about earlier, how our early life experiences inform how we show up today. So generally when we get triggered, if I shift gears slightly to a different teacher, Sal, he's an indigenous teacher that I've worked with in the States, and he talks about how our emotions live in our body, but oftentimes we make them cognitive. So fear is tightness in my chest maybe, and flushness in my face, and a lot of energy in my body. But then as soon as I say I'm scared or I'm afraid, I go to my head and I start trying to figure out, why am I scared? Why am I afraid? And how do I change it? So now I've left my body, which is where the actual sensations are being experienced. So I'm trying to fix it in my head, even though it's happening in my body. Kind of ties in with Gabor's stuff. So if you came to me, when you asked me how I was today, I said I'm a little bit overwhelmed. So if we were to do a compassionate inquiry session, you might say, okay, when you talk about this overwhelm, what do you experience in your body? And for some people, that would be very difficult for them to notice what's happening in their body. But I might say my heart feels kind of a little bit faster in the heart rate. I might say I feel a bit, and I'll describe what's going on. And it might be colors, it might be shapes, it might be sounds, but it's really trying to come into the physical sensations. Yeah. And then you say, okay, there's overwhelm, and the overwhelm's showing up as tightness in your chest and a sense of constriction in your body. Is this your first time experiencing these sensations? And inevitably, the answer is generally no. You'd also look at what's the story I'm telling myself. So when I'm overwhelmed, my story maybe is that the world's an uphill battle and I'll never get everything I need to get done. So now you're looking at the story, the sensations, and the feeling, and you're asking, is this your first time experiencing it? So I might say no. What's your first memory of feeling overwhelmed with this tightness in your chest and a belief that you'll never get things done? And generally you'll be 5 or 6 or 7. Yeah. And so Gabor will ask you, or the facilitator will ask you, who did you speak to about this at that time? And oftentimes the answer was no one, because there was no one there. And he'd ask, what would you tell a child now who's 5 or 6 or 7 who's having the same experience? So it's kind of inner child work in a sense. Can I give myself what I didn't have earlier on in life that's showing up now? And if you look at shadow work, you look at parts work, you look at lots of different modalities, I think a lot of them are pointing to a similar kind of methodology, that life is just giving us these experiences repeatedly so that we can complete childhood, so that we can integrate these disintegrated parts or fragmented parts.
Yeah, I think I was speaking to a therapist before as well, and we were talking about sort of addressing this younger version of yourself who you may disassociate yourself from. Looking back and bringing a more sort of compassionate inquiry, but a more compassionate sort of direction towards that 9-year-old, and turning back instead of looking towards the future, turning back and giving that 9-year-old who is still very much in there that love and that compassion and that assurance, I suppose, that everything is actually fine as it is and it will be okay, and I suppose that's sort of, would I be right in saying that's sort of what you're looking at with compassionate inquiry?
Yeah, I think so, because I think if we neglect these parts, if you don't look after the wounded parts within, unconsciously we'll look outside of ourselves. So we might look to a partner and expect them to fix us when we feel broken or wounded. It's like we'll go through life until we grow up. Like we all grow up biologically, so we're getting older biologically, but psychologically we often get stuck. And it's almost like we're waiting for mom or dad to come and save us. And that could be looking to the media, that could be looking to the politicians and seeing them as a mummy figure or a daddy figure who's going to make things right. Yeah. But I think growing up and psychological maturity is around accepting that I'm responsible. Things that have happened to me are not my fault, but looking after myself is my responsibility. And I think when we look after ourselves adequately and we look after ourselves well, that's when we actually have a chance to really connect with people on a deeper level, because we don't need things from them anymore. Like if I unconsciously need my partner to soothe me when my little boy shows up because he's feeling wounded, then I'm trying to take from her, as opposed to me looking after that part in myself, her looking after the parts of herself that need it, and then coming together from a more grounded and adult place, I guess.
Yeah.
The other piece with inner child that I kind of feel is important to note is that, you know, it can be kind of doom and gloom and heaviness and everything else. But the inner child is also where playfulness and creativity and spontaneity and sensuality and all these different aspects live. So it's like when we look after those younger parts, we actually allow ourselves the safety to play again and to feel safe in the world. And to, if you think about a very stern businessman who's very switched on and doesn't have time for messing about, they've probably lost their play. And part of losing the play is maybe losing connection to the younger self. Yeah.
And so finding that play, I suppose we do that through self-reflection, internal inquiry.
It's partially inquiry, probably. One of the ways, I guess, with Gabor's work, or IFS, which is internal family systems, I don't know if you've come across that stuff.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Is to work with the body. So if I was to tune in with my inner child and find a specific memory, 8-year-old playing in the garden, playing football, I might close my eyes and I might feel in my body where I can sense this younger part of me. And some people, again, will struggle with the kind of visceral experience of how is it in the body. So you might have an image, or you might even need to think of a nephew or a niece or some other child and kind of tuning in with that part, but almost conversing with that part. And you could do this in your mind. You could do this as a journaling prompt. So asking that younger self, what would you like to do today? That will be one way. Another way is, I was in a men's group years ago, and one of the exercises we had was they asked us about something our father didn't teach us that we wish they'd taught us. And there was an Italian guy on, lovely guy, and he got very emotional, and he said he wished his father had taught him how to shave. And this was something that he still held as a sad memory or whatever. So his homework that week was to go to the barber shop and pay a barber to give him a lesson on how to shave, so he could almost pick up that younger self and say, I've got you now. But then a more just, I guess, practical element with the play piece is that if my life is spent ignoring the wounded parts of myself, then I'm always kind of in this stoic soldier mode. So it's kind of like, can I put down the armor? Because when I put down the armor, I can shift gears. And I can allow myself, you know, a big one with men, big one for us all is grief, and like allowing ourselves to grieve. And, you know, when we numb ourselves to our sadness and to our emotion, we don't let ourselves cry. It numbs us to everything else. So play becomes, and that's when life starts losing its color a little bit. Like the idea of depression is pushing down all of our emotion. So you got to cry before you play.
Yeah, I know. And it's interesting though. I've been talking to so many people about various different things, but something that does come up a lot is that you know, this idea of the law of polarity. You know, there's black and white, there's good and bad, and you can't experience true happiness unless you've experienced true sadness, and vice versa. You know, you won't experience true sadness unless you experience true happiness. You know, and so that just plays exactly to that as well. Just a quick word from our sponsors on this podcast. This week's sponsor is Simply Zen. Simply Zen is one of the most amazing, magical and spiritual holistic and wellbeing brands in Northern Ireland today and across the UK. Simply Zen hosts a range of different events, a range of different training academies, and they also have fantastic products on their website and in store that range from crystals, such as the one I'm wearing on my neck at the moment, to incense, jewelry, novelty gifts, ritual items, and so much more. Everything for your magical needs. Simply Zen is the home of holistic well-being, and if you want to visit them, they're based in Belfast City Centre, and you can also visit their online store, simplyzen.co.uk. And if you want to check out any of the events they have on, they always put out their events at the start of every single month, whether that is training courses, ceremonies, retreats, or just a simple meditation and sound bath experience. Simply Zen is there for all of your spiritual, mindful, emotional, and well-being needs. They also have a range of different therapies such as Reiki energy healing, Indian head massage, Rahani celestial healing, Hopi ear candling, facials, and so much more. So if you're into your spirituality, if you're into your mindfulness, if you're into your well-being, check out simplyzen.co.uk. And if you're wanting to shop online for an amazing gift or something just to treat yourself, don't forget to use the code Tru North for 10% off. That's TRUNORTH, Tru North, in your voucher code at the checkout for 10% off. So why wait around? Make your life magical today with Simply Zen. We've touched upon a few different things, I suppose, especially in terms of emotional well-being. And I think for a lot of people, especially with being cooped up inside, and you know, I'm not even going to go into all the details because everybody lived through it at some point about 3 years ago. But I speak to so many people who find that they've had a serious dip in their confidence. Why do you think, and I know it's a thing for men as well, it could be masked, but why do you think we have so many confidence issues?
I think there's a couple of things. One is comparison. You know, unconsciously there's a lot of comparison. Social media, mass media, a lot of time looking outward. I would even see myself, you know, if I was to take up surfing, I've done a little bit of surfing, I'm awful. But if I'm to take up surfing, I'm going to go on YouTube, look at some surfing stuff, and I'm probably going to look at guys that are good at surfing, because I'm not going to look at crappy surfers to learn how to surf. So suddenly my benchmark for what I should be doing is like sky high. And so I think that's one piece, is there's an unconscious case of comparison going on a lot of the time. I think another piece is maybe we're trying to do things that we don't actually want to do. So it's going to be hard to find confidence in those things because it's going to be hard to find the energy to keep going. Like there's a million things I'm not good at. There's a handful of things I am good at. I can develop confidence in the areas where I'm strong. I had a teacher years ago, John D. Martini, who's a good teacher, and he talks a lot about values. So like figure out what your values are. And sometimes when we do value exercise, we're looking at things like compassion or curiosity or play or some of the things we talked about earlier. But John's system is more around saying maybe I have a value on cooking or teaching or socializing or family. But he sort of says if you figure out your top 3 values and you try make your life fit around those values as much as possible, you'll never need motivation. So in my life, I would call myself unorganized. But if you look at jiu-jitsu, which I'm into, you look at teaching or coaching, I'm very organized in those areas. I don't procrastinate. I'm motivated. I don't need motivation. Actually, I'm just inspired all the time. I have energy always for those things. They're not a chore because I value those things. So I think, you know, it's if you're doing something to impress other people, or you're doing something because it's cool or whatever, I think it's going to be hard again to find confidence. I think the final piece, well, look, there's many pieces, but I think the final piece that comes to me right now is the idea that confidence comes from certainty. My confidence comes from certainty. And you'll see that in a room. If you go to a room and there's people talking, it's the one who's most certain that you're going to have the most confidence in. And if confidence comes from certainty, I need to look at where my certainty lives. And my certainty doesn't live tomorrow. It lives in yesterday. That means our confidence lives in the past. So a lot of us will say, I'll be confident when I start my podcast, or I'll be confident when I record 10 episodes, whatever it might be. That's always in the future. If you live that way, you'll always put it outside of yourself. But if you start tracking your wins, so a very simple analogy is you think about a child coming back from school and saying, I did this and this and this and this today. And the parent saying, I wish you'd done more. You should have done more. That child's confidence and self-esteem will dwindle. But if the parent were to say, that's amazing, tell me more about that. Okay, what's next? The child's going to feel 10 foot tall. And the same for ourselves. A lot of us do 10 things in the day. We come home and our mind just goes to what went wrong, what's missing, what's in the way. So I think having a consistent practice of tracking your wins, tracking your progress, writing down what you're doing well, that will help build confidence. Actually, one more piece, lots of moving parts, but I mentioned playfulness, curiosity, compassion, these things earlier on. These are my values, like my core values. And the way I see it, every time I act from a place of confidence, or act from a place of playfulness and compassion or curiosity, I'm taking deposits and I'm putting them in my bank account. And the bigger that bank account, the more confidence I'm going to have. Now, if I act the opposite, I'm taking money out of my account. So if rather than practicing compassion, I practice judgment, I'm taking money out of my account. In other words, when you show up for yourself consistently, and showing up for yourself means knowing what you value and pursuing those values. If you do that consistently, you build your confidence. But if you act against your values for long enough, no.
Yeah, you're putting it into minus. I think values, it's something that so much of us, we can think, yes, we are, I think, coming from a moral standpoint, but a lot of us don't understand the actual meaning of values. And so I'm curious if you have any input as to how people can find what their values are.
Yeah. It's interesting. Just on a side, I work a lot with the archetypes. So like, there's countless archetypes: the mother, the father, the joker, the adventurer, the hero, the gossip, the addict, the hermit, the hero. There's so many different archetypes. And it's a really useful system, because if you identify what your archetypes are, you can start to see what the gold is and what the shadow is. So for example, if one of your archetypes is teacher, and that's a strong energy within you to be a teacher, the gold for the teacher is like helping their students and imparting wisdom. But the shadow for the teacher is like trying to hold your students at your mercy by maybe withholding information or not letting them move on once they finish with you. So that's one example. But when you have people identify which archetypes are true for them, generally they'll base it on their personality, so who they've been told they are, or they'll base it on what looks cool. So everybody wants to be a hero, everybody wants to be a king, but you have to be realistic. Like some of my archetypes, I've got a gossip is one of my archetypes, an addict is one of my archetypes, a hermit is one of my archetypes. You have to be honest. And same thing with the values. If someone says they value their family but they don't ever hang out with their family, there's a big disconnect there. So you can obviously adjust your behavior, or you can adjust the value, but how do you identify? There's a couple of questions I generally get people to ask as a simple starting point. You might ask, like, if you were a fly on the wall and all your friends were sitting around having lunch and they were talking about you, what would you love to hear them saying about you? Would you like to hear them saying you were creative and enthusiastic and outgoing? Would you like to hear them saying you're social and you're reliable? And so think about the words you'd like to hear to describe you. Think about who you've been in the past when you've been at your best. An example of that is sometimes people travel early on in life. So they might travel in their late teens, early 20s, and they look back with nostalgia 20 years on and I wish I could travel again. One of the reasons the travel was so incredible was probably because you were enthusiastic and open and creative and social, and you might think about who you were in those moments and then how can you bring that into your day-to-day life. Another question, like when you die and someone's standing at your funeral giving a eulogy, what words would you like to hear? So some of those words can inform your values. Also what you admire in other people. I noticed myself drawn to, actually here's an example. I worked with a lady a few years ago and we looked at kind of how she spent her free time, and she was spending hours watching like SAS, Who Dares Wins, the TV show. She was beating herself up about it, and I said, maybe it's informing one of your values. And she was outsourcing a value. So she had a value in adventure, but rather than living the adventures herself, she was putting people on pedestals and watching them live the adventure. So yeah, who you are when you're at your best, who you admire. Like if you admire, I admire Anthony Bourdain. I think that guy's pretty cool, or was pretty cool. Alex Atala, another chef. There's these guys that I admire because I like their sense of adventure, their sense of being like Renaissance men that let themselves be many different things, like martial artists and chefs and travelers. And so, those are some ideas, I think.
Cool. Yeah. I think it's always something that just from my conversations and from my own experience as well, it's difficult sometimes to even understand what a value is, never mind find your values, And
maybe just one on that, like if everybody feels the need to say their family or their top value, and if it's not true, as you say, there's kind of a moral obligation, okay, my family are my top value. But if you're lying to yourself and your top value really is your health, for example, and you put your family ahead of your health, then your family are getting a second best version of you, as opposed to saying health is my top value. When I look after my health, then my family actually get the better version of me. So that might be an example.
Yeah. So it's not just that you're doing a disservice to yourself, but you're also doing a disservice by offering a lesser version of yourself to your family.
Potentially there's going to be resentment there because you're going to say, I give up all these things for you, when maybe you weren't ever asked to give up all those things for them.
Yeah.
or if I value, if I say I value my family, but I put my work first all the time, then it's confronting. I think values are confronting.
Yeah. And when you put other things above the things that are actually probably should be higher on your list, then it's going to bring internal conflict for sure.
Yeah.
You touched upon expression earlier on. I think it was when we were talking about the men's work. And I just want to read this because it's a really great sentence that I found on your website. In the About section, if anybody wants to go and read it. And I don't know why, it just made me laugh. And I thought, not in a bad way, it just made me really connect with it.
Okay. I have no idea what this is.
Yeah, you haven't a clue. And I just found it to be really honest and really authentic and genuine. So I'm just going to read it. It's something along the lines of, I've been known to climb a few mountains and play the guitar at a mediocre level. And I just, it was the last thing in particular, because I know I'd mentioned briefly earlier about my experience in music. Which my guitar level playing is probably just as mediocre, to be fair. But it really just made me think, do you have a creative outlet or sort of a path to expression that allows you to bring out sort of that deeper true sense or that truer self of who Pat really is deep down?
I write poetry here and there. I would like to be more consistent with that. When I do it, I love it, so definitely like to be more consistent with that. I think if there was one area I was to put focus on, it would be less consumption and more creation. Like, that would be an important piece for me. So yeah, I have written poetry. Interestingly, as a kid, I was good at arts, and I won an art competition when I was young, like, I don't know, 8. And I'd been bullied quite a bit at the time. And the local newspaper came in to take my photo, and I vividly remember being pulled to the side to get my photo taken. And I had this, like, looking back at the class, and I was thinking, oh, this is not good. I'm going to be picked on more. I think I formed an association in that moment that when you win, you're on your own. That came from the Gabor Mate work, But I try not to get too bogged down with, like, obsessing over those things. But creative outlet, I play a bit of guitar. I tell a lot of stories, through my work and stuff like that, which feels somewhat creative. I'd like to get into stand-up comedy at some point.
Really?
Yeah. Poetry. I appreciate the question, because it's something I need to lean into a bit more.
Yeah, I just felt really connected with it, and it made me think. It also made me look internally and think, what is my creative outlet? Like, what do I do? And I know when we go into sort of positions of leadership or business or management or whatever it may be, that a lot of the time we get so bogged down by the stuff we think's important that we forget about who we were before any of that. And it's something that I've sort of been looking at recently. I
guess jiu-jitsu is my other somewhat creative outlet, but when I'm in this phase that I mentioned at the start, where I've got I pack in too much. I sometimes work like this. I do a huge amount of talks in a month or two, and then I take 2 months, not off, but I go into the shadows, or I go climb a mountain, or I do something to. But sometimes when I'm in this phase, I do, and this is I think common. Sometimes we reduce ourselves to thinking we are what we do. That's what I am, at least. Like, when I'm in the zone, I think I'm a teacher, and that's, I think, all I am. I'm a teacher. I'm a facilitator, but I would like to think I'm a lot more, and that's just one small aspect. But when I get wrapped up in work, like everyone else, I probably reduce myself to what I do for 8 hours in the day or whatever it might be. Yeah. But my life is a lot more than that. It should be, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted on a personal level to talk about this experience, if you have any input on it, but I wanted to ask you about the Camino. So for those that don't know, the Camino de Santiago, there are various routes to Santiago de Compostela, isn't it, in Spain? And you can walk 800 kilometers, 800 odd kilometers, or you could do a shorter version of it. And if you haven't seen it, there's a film called The Way as well, but I know you did the northern way, and I'm not even going to try and say Camino de whatever. Norte, yeah. For those that don't know the Camino, and obviously your experience will be different of it, what sort of brief description can you give of the Camino?
It's a pilgrimage. As you say, it lasts anything from a few days up to a month. Actually, I met people that had just walked back and forth and just kept going for years,
Really?
you know, that had given up everything and just kept walking. Generally a pilgrimage, 840 kilometers on average, I think, if you do the full thing, whether you do the French route or the northern route. Steeped in religious background. I don't really, I'm not too sure of the religious background, but it was an ancient pilgrimage. You stay in albergues, which are these like community hostels, super basic. So you share your meals with the people in the albergue, pay a couple of euro a night. You get a passport, a pilgrim's passport, and you get a stamp in each of the venues that you stay. And people go for varying reasons. I met people I met a girl who was 25 from Ibiza, covered in tattoos, smoking and drinking, and was in the nuns' gear. She was becoming a nun, so that was one example. She was walking the pilgrimage to decide, did she want to dedicate her life to God? Met a lady who met her husband on the Camino 3 years ago, and he since died. She was only in her late 20s, early 30s. Met people retiring, people doing it together as couples, met a couple that fell in love on the first day and walked the full thing together, every type of person. Personally, my reason for doing it was, I always thought it was something older people did. Like, I'm 35 now, but I always thought it was when you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s. My parents just got back, actually. They just walked some of the Camino a couple of days ago. It was post-COVID and all that stuff. And I announced to my father that I was going to go to Japan and do a pilgrimage in Japan called the 88 Temples. And my father kind of challenged me. He said, why do you always have to do something different? Why can't you do like something normal? Or not normal, but... And years ago, I might have got triggered by that and thought, I'm an individual and all this kind of stuff. But I recognized the truth in what he was saying. It's like you were saying earlier with the polarity, you know, that we can get extreme with our views. I think a lot of my life I've gone the opposite direction, and that can be useful, but it can be limiting too if that's your only mode of being. So his kind of prompt was, why don't you just go do the Camino? It's much easier. And so the compromise was, I met a guy the next day. I said, I'm going to go do this Camino, and he said, do the north route. He didn't know me at all, but he said, do the north. He said, the French route's really busy. You'll meet very few people on the north. You'll get lots of headspace. And so I kind of booked the flight and went and did the month, and it was a great experience.
I was just curious to know sort of your experience and why you went.
Why I went was more like I was telling this is the great thing, actually. A lot of Germans on the Camino, because some guy wrote a book, some stand-up comedian. I think he's like the version, he's probably like Tommy Tiernan, but the German version. And a couple of years ago, he wrote a book about walking the Camino. He had never walked or whatever before. So this was big in Germany, so a lot of Germans go. But I would laugh because every day you'd walk and you'd meet someone for like 2 minutes, and then they go, so the question, why the Camino? You're just like 10 times a day answer this question. I didn't have... My only reason was every now and then, not every now and then, a couple of times a year, I like to slow down and just make sure I'm going in the right direction. Which means I try not to get wrapped up in going too fat. Like next week, I'll go to France for a week of warm water rebirthing, which is a different story. But it's incredible. I'm not religious, but it's humbling to think how many million people have probably walked the same path, and to hear people's stories. I liked the fact I would walk for 8 hours a day, pretty much on my own. I liked the solitude of being on my own. And then in the evening, I'd hang out with people in the albergues, and just to hear people's stories. And I think it just brings us back to basics. You know, if everyone were to do a Camino once a year, it might be useful, because you're getting a lot of exercise. You're getting a lot of socializing and time in nature. You're having a lot of real conversation, a lot less time on technology. You're sharing meals. I learned that from plant medicine ceremonies over the years. If all I got from a plant medicine ceremony was to do dinner with a group of 20 people and break bread together, I think there's healing in that. So amazing experience if you get the chance.
Yeah. And what would you say to somebody who, because in my head, I'm just sort of thinking what I maybe would have thought of in the past would be, you know, oh my God, no, that sounds insane. The walking doesn't sound too bad, to be fair, but I probably would have thought, speaking to all those random people, like, you know, like freaking out, like, and sharing your stories, and like, you know, so what would you say to somebody that's maybe contemplating, whether it's the Camino or whether it's stepping out of their comfort zone in any shape or form? What would your advice be to that person?
Partially, it's what I think I said it earlier in some capacity was hold your shadow in front of you. So I said, like, I have this shadow mission where I know how I'm going to trip myself up. When I went on Camino, I kept a journal, and on the first day at the airport, I wrote down my mission for the Camino and my shadow mission, which sounds a bit extreme, but my mission for the Camino was to have a unique and inspiring adventure full of connection and open-heartedness. And then my shadow mission was to have a boring and predictable Camino by drinking lots of beer and just going through the motions. So that was useful. So I would say to people, if you're stepping into a challenge or an adventure, you're stepping into something new, or just in general, ask yourself, what's the part of me that will trip myself up? Because we all have parts that want to keep us safe. So if you're single and you've been single for a while and you really want to meet someone, there's a part of you that really wants to meet someone, but there's another part of you that loves your own company, loves your routine, loves your freedom. So having an awareness of both, I think, is useful. Like having an awareness that when you go on a second date and things are going well, that part of you that loves your own company is going to start chiming in and say, just fuck it up here, just make a mess of things, you know? And we have all these shadowy parts. The nature of the Camino and things like that are, you know, people are going to... I think I was on my second day and I met a lady who had done 10 Caminos. She was an older lady from England, and I asked her something. She was quite stern. She was a teacher. She'd been a teacher back in the day. She was quite stern, and I asked her something about, like, where's the albergue or where do we stop today, I said. And she goes, well, you stop wherever you want to stop. It's your Camino. It's your Camino. And that struck a chord with me in the sense of, like, it's your Camino. It's also your life. And I'll speak in I statements. I have such a tendency to look around me and say, am I where I'm supposed to be? Am I doing this right? Am I making a mess of things, etc., etc.? It's my life. I can't get it wrong if I listen to myself a little bit deeper. So the encouragement for people is just to allow yourself, develop the self-trust by just slowly listening a little bit more to yourself. And the way you do that is you create a bit of space where maybe an hour in the day you don't have your phone on. Maybe you use pen and paper and use a journal, but find a practice of listening to yourself. I always say that when I do an adventure, like I got into climbing mountains a few years ago, and the bigger mountains, you'd be 21 days on the mountain without technology. And when you first go, the first few days, there's a whisper in you that's kind of saying, okay, you need to change this in your life and this in your life. And you stay long enough without any distraction, and the whisper turns into a very clear voice. And it's similar for ourselves, but if we're at home and the whisper comes in and it says, maybe change your job, that might be uncomfortable. And so we pick up the phone and we say, right, I'm going to distract myself here. So just form a way of listening to yourself, I think, is key.
I always say trust in your gut and your instinct. And I find a lot of people can hear it, but they either don't trust it, they don't want to trust it, or they think it's their mind playing tricks on them. And I think it's very much sort of, I think you touched upon it earlier as well, you know, listening to your actual body and what your body's telling you as well in that moment in time, because it will give you indications and signs that you're actually hearing the right thing, you know. And you touched upon journaling and things like that. I'm writing stuff down as well. I do a lot of gratitude practice. I'm not too sure what your opinion is of that, so I suppose I'll ask you that question. in a sense of, you know, gratitude and living with gratitude and using that as sort of a starting point or a compass to help you move forward.
Yeah, there's an amazing teacher called Francis Weller. He does a lot around grief. Incredible teacher. And I think he says something to the effect of emotional maturity is being able to hold grief and gratitude at the same time, or something like that, like two wings of the same bird, love and loss. And the reason I say that is that if I only have gratitude as a practice and that's my go-to, that's a form of spiritual bypassing. It's dissociating from what's actually happening. So if my life is falling apart and my only default setting is to go to gratitude, it's like the parent who ignores the child's cries and said, you should be grateful. Things could be a lot worse. You can be grateful, and I think that's important. So I'm a fan of gratitude practice for sure. If people are already doing a gratitude practice, just a little thing that can be useful is to add the question why. So, okay, I'm grateful for my father. And then you ask, why am I grateful for my father? And then maybe it adds a layer, makes it a bit more, it takes it from a to-do list to an actual feeling. So yeah, I think there's value in gratitude practice for sure, and appreciation. And I think also just allowing yourself to feel what you feel is important too. So those two in conjunction with one another. Gratitude really good, but not at the mercy of ignoring what you actually feel. So it could be that I'm feeling a lot of, I mentioned at the start of the thing, you said, you know, my friend said last week, how's your heart? I said a little bit sad and tired, and also excited and, you know, grateful for everything I'm getting to do at the moment. So I think, again, emotional maturity, can I hold a couple of things at once? Because coming back to the idea of emotional expression and allowing ourselves to feel what we feel, generally when we express an emotion and we allow ourselves to lean into the discomfort of what we're experiencing in our body, it doesn't last that long. The challenge becomes when we add story and drama to what we're experiencing. So if I feel sad and I get caught up in mental loops about why I'm sad and who fucked me over and what I need to do and all this kind of stuff, and I just swim in that stuff, that's where pain becomes suffering. So if I can do my gratitude practice, and I can also maybe close my eyes, come into my body, notice where there's tension, soften the tension, give that a little bit of space. I think that's a nice little combo.
Yeah.
Happy meal.
Just get some chicken nuggets, some chips, I'll have a ketchup. Yes, you spoke a little bit about stories, and the stories we tell ourselves as well. How can people redefine their stories in a way? Because I know a lot of us will, I think especially when we look at comparison, and especially with social media, and we think, oh, woe me, that person's a supermodel, and, you know, like I do not look like that. How do we redefine the stories that we tell ourselves?
One practical piece is there's a journaling exercise called the ABCD method. And with that, what you do is you get pen and paper, you take a couple of minutes. It's like a writing meditation. So the idea is that oftentimes we think we're thinking, but really we're just remembering. So we're just playing the same patterns out. Neuroscientists say like 95% of today's thoughts will be very similar to yesterday. So we're just kind of replaying the same stuff. And so having an active meditation on a thought and giving it a bit of space can be useful. So the ABCD strategy, A, you write down the activating event. So activating event means what was the source or what happened that has resulted in stress. So example I often give is I walk to the shop, I wave to my neighbor who I see passing across the road, they don't wave back. So maybe identify that as a source of stress.
The trigger, I suppose.
Yeah, trigger. So it's what happened, I guess. Okay. What would a camera have seen? What happened without judgment? Went on social media, saw an X pop up on the newsfeed. Okay, so something happened. And then it goes to B. So B is the belief. And so already we're in a meditation where we're separating the situation versus the story we've told ourselves. So activating event, go on social media, see an X pop up on the newsfeed with a new partner. And then B is the belief. So activating event, now the belief. What's the belief? What did I make that mean? Maybe I didn't mean it. They never cared about me. They've moved in already. I'm not enough. Fill in the blank. C is consequences. So now you say, okay, there's consequences to my beliefs. So what are the consequences when I believe that they never cared about me? Now I've got anger and resentment toward them. I'm less likely to form a new relationship. I feel hurt. I feel sad. And you'll just list all the consequences just to see, again, slowing it down, recognizing this is impactful. This is impacting me. The last bit then, which is challenging again to the ego, because the ego likes to be right more than it likes to be happy, is D, which is dispute. And with that, you're going to imagine you're in court and you're on the opposition and you're fighting against this belief. So you're saying she does care about me and she hasn't moved on quickly or something to that effect. And you'll try to find the evidence and suddenly you say, maybe she's not with that person in the video. You'll just come up with it. And again, like the gratitude thing, it's not about deluding yourself. It's not about denying the truth. It's just about going from a fixation with how it is to other possibilities.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's something I could personally, use as a tool. If I take anything from today, is definitely, ABCD. And I definitely think that when we talked about the gratitude practice as well, we spoke so much about polarity and, to the shadow side as well, and given that time and space. And I think there's something really empowering about stepping into your body and feeling what you're, or acknowledging, I suppose, what you're actually feeling. Because so often we don't, take the time to actually do that. Before we start to sort of just round off, this might feel a bit repetitive, but I just want to ask you, what's important to you?
I feel authenticity above all else for me is to like be authentic to my expression, like who I want to be in the world and how I want to be in the world. Not overlooking my needs, my desires, my feelings, expressing myself well, and yeah, I see myself as a teacher, a jiu-jitsu guy, a guy that plays the guitar a little bit, a student. Learning is important to me. Authenticity, I don't know how like clear an answer that is, but for me it's about being authentic and being authentic now versus where I'll be tomorrow versus where I'll be in a year. In 5 years, what I'm doing may be very different, but I think how I'm doing it will be similar. So that mission of safe space for myself and others and playfulness, and I hope I can bring that to anything, whether I own a jiu-jitsu gym in a few years or I'm a stand-up comedian or whatever I end up doing. So authentic, being myself.
Yeah, I like that answer. It feels very aligned, you know, to what you're doing at that present moment, you know, like just, as you say, being truthful to yourself and I suppose in a sense also being truthful to everybody around you as well, because there's no point in putting up a front when you're not feeling that alignment. We have I suppose I'm going to call it a tradition now because I sort of said it. At the end of this podcast, I always ask 3 questions. They're the same 3 questions for everybody. They're a bit more thought-provoking questions. Well, I think they are anyway. So the magic 3, the first question is, what is the best advice you've ever heard?
The one I'm sharing at the moment, I don't know where I heard it or if I came to it myself, or if it's a combination of both. The advice I'm sharing with myself the most often and sharing with others is that we get better at the things that we practice, or we become what we practice. So what that means is, if I want to be an authentic person, I've got to practice being authentic, and that might start from ground zero. If I want to be a good surfer, I've got to practice surfing. If I want to be calm, I've got to practice calm. And the reason it's great advice in my mind is that for a long time, I told myself I'm good at things and I'm bad at things. And most of the things I thought I was bad at. I'm bad at languages, I'm bad at dancing, I'm bad at this, I'm bad at socializing, you know. And now I've rephrased that, and it's like I haven't practiced those things. So that's been good advice for me. That's helped me and empowered me to just recognize, just like fitness, when I started fitness at 13 or 14, I couldn't do a push-up. And by doing a lot of repetitions and failing forward and failing fast and failing often, I developed through practice. So we become what we practice. So I think it's important to be conscious and aware of what you're practicing. Are you practicing living with an open heart or a closed heart? Are you practicing leaning in or leaning away? Are you practicing being authentic or being disingenuous, you know? So
yeah, fantastic. I love that. What is the most valuable lesson you've learned in life so far?
Big questions, aren't they?
Yeah, thought-provoking. You go deep.
I think it's just to listen to a deeper part of myself. To go beyond logic. Logic is very limited, I think. Like, think of a relationship as an example, or someone setting you up on a date with someone and on paper they're perfect, but you just don't vibe or you just don't click. That shows you that things don't always make sense logically. Or think of a job where the money's incredible, but it makes you feel awful. Yeah. Logically, it makes sense to be there, but when you think a bit deeper, or you listen a bit deeper, I should say, that's the most important piece, I think, for me, is to listen deeper, to continue to listen deeper, to trust, to surrender. Yeah.
Fantastic. And finally, we've touched upon this. Tru North is all about direction towards purpose. What would you define as your purpose at this stage of your life?
My purpose is to teach principles of self-care and authenticity and connection to men primarily, I think.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you're working towards on a personal or professional level?
Yeah. I'm really curious in general, so I like to study lots of different things, and that's been great. But I think a part of me late last year kind of recognized that there was, again, a shadow to this, like the shadow of distraction. So we didn't get into talking about the archetypes a lot today, but one of the archetypes is the king archetype, and that's about innovation and bringing things into the world. But the shadow for the king, or anyone that embodies the king, is distraction. So it's the guy that has 5 instruments in his house that he can't play, or 100 books on the bookshelf he hasn't read. And I recognize that pattern in myself quite a bit. So one of my commitments this year was to really refining and honing into a few key things. So professionally, what I'm working on is breath work, and really going deep on the breath work stuff. I've done a bunch of trainings, and I'm doing more. Men's work, shadow work. Those are my 3 things: breath work, men's work, shadow work. So going really deep on that. And then somatic healing, so bioenergetic work and all that kind of stuff around the body. And then outside of professional, I'm working my jiu-jitsu. And that's me. That's my refinement.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm definitely going to think about that king archetype, because I hear a few of the shadow aspects, and I'm like, yep, that makes sense.
Yeah,
all the books on the shelf. Yeah, I haven't read them.
The challenge for the king is again, I learned this from my K4 group that I'm in, and they talk about decisive. The word decisive, or to decide, means to cut off from. It's from the same root as the word incision. So suicide, homicide is to cut off from. So when you decide something, you cut off from all other options. So part of the king's work is to decide, what am I going to create here? And you've got to say no to 9 out of 10 projects to make the one project work well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's some advice I'll take off at the end of this podcast as well. Listen, thank you very much,
My
Pat,
pleasure.
for coming on. I've really appreciated it. I've learned so much myself today in such a short space of time, and hopefully anybody listening has as well, and has found some great value from it. For those people who are maybe just finding you for the first time, where can people find your work or your information?
PatDivilly.com is my website. I have a podcast called the Pat Divilly Podcast, and a book that came out last year called Fit Mind, which has kind of an 8-week journaling and meditation program in there. So I appreciate you having me, and you're very good at what you do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All the links for Pat's website and the details will be in the description of this podcast. All that's left to say is thank you very much, Pat, and have a great week, everybody. All the best.